Okay, everyone, we're gonna look at the sixth round of the Candidates 2022 tournament. And the game that we're gonna look at is Radjabov versus Rapport. And so Radjabov has the white pieces. It starts with e4, and Rapport plays the Sicilian, and with the e6 variation. So Radjabov plays the open Sicilian, and now Rapport plays the Taimanov variation. So here, I'm not going to go very in detail with the opening. So knight c3, a6, knight captures c6. Normally, black captures with the b pawn to not go to this endgame with the pawn. Then queen captures. This endgame is actually good for white. So instead, most of the time, black players, they capture with the b pawn. Now we play queen d3, d5, queen g3. This theory stopping h4. White plays the h4 himself, and after d4, Radjabov plays knight b1. Now this move at first seems like a very suspicious move because it's going back. But if you look at the pieces, the queen is out, black's queen is not out yet, and white has pushed 2 pawns, and black has pushed 5 pawns here, which means black might have more weaknesses eventually in his position. So maneuvering the knight to b1 and then maybe to d2 is not such a bad idea here. So knight f6, e5, kicking the knight. Knight goes to e4. Now queen f3, attacking the knight back. Queen d5, protecting the knight, also attacking the pawn on e5. So Radjabov plays bishop d3, counterattacking the knight. Bishop b4, and here he does not want to play, for example, knight d2 to trade the minor pieces. So he plays a king f1, just sidestepping the check. And after f5, this is very common to play the en passant move so that the e pawn is going to be a weak pawn in the future. And after the knight takes, bishop g6 check, king runs away, bishop g5, developing the bishops, rook f8, and then c3, bishop d6, captures, and a queen trade offered by Radjabov. And of course, if the queen takes, this is actually a good way to develop the knight here. So that's why Rapport goes for a different queen trade. He gives a check on d1 and then trades this way so that the knight does not come to c3 with tempo. So rook b8 was played, knight d2. Doesn't really care about the pawn because if the rook takes the pawn, there's knight c4, activating the knight. And now Rapport plays bishop b4 check, king goes to f1, knight goes to g4, and now we can see that all of Rapport's pieces, the knight and both of the rooks, are attacking this pawn here on f2. So Radjabov has to find a move to stop that, and he plays f3, stopping the knight's attack, this rook's attack, and even if this rook attacks, we have a pawn to protect our pawn. So Rapport gives a check on f2, king g1, and bishop c5. Okay, here it's a very complicated position. Rapport is just saying, okay, you can take my knight. Radjabov takes the knight, and Radjabov thinks, okay, whatever check you give, I'm gonna be fine. So if you give a check on f1, this is actually a really bad move because we can play king h2, and now the rooks are actually protecting each other, so there's no rook captures on a1 winning the rook. So if rook captures, then we capture with the rook, and white is just up a piece and winning. So that's why Rapport goes for rook f4, goes after this knight. And here Radjabov thinks a little, like 5 minutes, and he plays knight to e3. So very tricky move. He could have also gone king h2 and played that, but then it's going to be a pretty equal endgame after rook captures c4, and even black can be slightly better. So he plays knight e3, very tricky. Bishop captures, and now his plan is after the king goes to h2, the bishop is going to have this very nice skewer on the rook. So Rapport plays rook captures pawn, saying, okay, if you take my bishop, I will take yours. And that's what happened in the game. And here, now, black is up 2 pawns. These 2 pawns are extra. And if you look at the position, black's rooks look more active. Okay? But now, that's actually true, but it's white's turn, and white is going to activate his rooks very fast. So that's one of the parts of this endgame, and the king is actually going to be in danger, the black king. So that's why I believe white has more practical chance in this game, in this endgame, especially the bishop is also on the same color as these pawns. So this bishop is going to be also a weak piece. So Radjabov plays rook h d1, which is the right rook to play, because after king c7, he's going to bring the other rook to an open file. And now these rooks are so much better than black's rooks. So Rapport plays bishop e7, develops the bishop. Bishop c5, attacking the rook. Rook goes to e8. That's actually the only move here. Excuse me, a move. There's also rook g8 or whatever, but a move something like, of course, rook f4 runs into bishop d6, or a move like rook f5 can run into bishop b6. And if you play something like king c8, there's a mate, of course, here. And if you play king b8, then you would have to play a position where you have very inactive pieces. For example, bishop c5, making sure that the rook cannot block this white rook's check on b5. And when the king, of course, if the king runs to a8, we have a checkmate in 1. And if the king goes to c7, then we can give a check on b6, repeat this, or we can just simply play, let's say like this, and then we can play something like a4, stopping the rook from going to b5. And white will be better here because white's pieces are so active and these 2 pieces are very, very bad. So let's go back to the game. So Rapport plays rook e8. So there's no, for example, there's bishop b6, but there will be no rook d8 since the black rook is controlling the back rank. So Radjabov gives a check on d6. King goes to c8. And he plays bishop e5, centralizing the bishop. There is no piece that can kick this bishop away. For example, there is no rook g5 because the pawn on h4 is controlling that square. So Rapport plays rook g4, attacking the h pawn. Radjabov says, okay, you can take my pawn, it's fine. I want to go to f7. That's my plan. And there's going to be some tactics there. So he captures, which is a really bad move. Rapport does not care about this rook f7 idea, which is really bad, because after king g1, rook f7 is actually a very strong threat. For example, if you try to stop it with rook e7, then the back rank is gonna be a problem, and this is a checkmate. So that doesn't work, and anything else would be losing too. For example, let's look at what happened in the game. Rapport played rook e4, which is a very tricky move, because now if you play rook f7, which was played in the game, that's actually a blunder, because after rook captures bishop and rook captures bishop, white doesn't really have a way to win this. For example, here white needs to go for a draw with this rook checks, because if white does anything else, let's say after rook b5, if white goes for this, then it's going to be bad, because after king b8, remember black has two extra pawns, and since both sides traded the bishops, these two pawns are going to be very strong, and black is going to just push them and try to promote one of them. So that's why here white has to make a draw. But let's go back to this position where Radjabov had a win by simply playing bishop to h2. So of course, at first it might be a hard move to see, but the plan is very clear. White plays bishop h2, and now the bishop is safe, and rook f7 is again unstoppable. Black cannot stop this move. If, again, black plays rook e7, rook f8 is a problem. The king can't go to c7 because of the bishop on h2, very strong bishop. So he has to go to d7, or the rook is going to block, and all of them are losing. So another move to stop this would be e5, blocking the bishop away, but it doesn't really stop rook f7. So white is going to still play rook f7, and let's say black saves the bishop with bishop a8, then white has a very strong move, rook a7, to win this bishop, since the king can't protect the bishop because of the rook, and the king cannot go to the 7th rank because of the other rook. So the bishop is going to get captured pretty soon, and white is just winning here. So Radjabov missed a winning chance with bishop h2. It wasn't so clear, of course, and he didn't really have that much time on his clock. But yeah, so this is the recap of the 6th round, the game between Radjabov and Rapport.